The subcommittee will come to order. Pursuant to notice, the subcommittee will meet this morning to mark up H.R. 1777, the Increasing American Jobs Through Exports to Africa Act of 2013. As our members are aware, this measure enjoys strong bipartisan support. There are competing hearings and other events taking place this morning, so we will move quickly to its consideration. It's the intent of the Chair to consider this measure en bloc, along with a substitute amendment sent to you on Tuesday. All members have copies of these documents before them, and then after we've concluded our expedited consideration, I will be glad to I will recognize myself, Ranking Member Cicilline, who's sitting in for Ranking Member Bass, and any other members who would like to make a statement. All members are given leave to insert written remarks in the record should they choose to do so. Seeing that a reporting quorum is present and without objection, the following are considered as read and will be considered en bloc. H.R. 1777, the Increasing American Jobs Through Greater Exports to Africa Act of 2013. The Smith Amendment 36 to H.R. 1777, sent to your offices on Tuesday. The Chair moves that the en bloc items be adopted. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the items considered en bloc are adopted. Without objection, the measures as amended are reported favorably to the full committee, and the staff is directed to make technical and conforming changes. Now that we've completed the formal consideration of these measures, again, I would like to recognize myself for a brief explanation of the bill. H.R. 1777, the Increasing American Jobs Through Greater Exports to Africa Act of 2013. This bill, which I'm happy to say is co-sponsored by our Ranking Member Karen Bass, Congressman Bobby Rush, directs the President to establish a comprehensive U.S. strategy for public and private investment, trade, and development in Africa. This legislation focuses, among other things, on increasing exports of U.S. goods and services to Africa by 200% in real dollar value within 10 years. According to the Department of Commerce, every $1 billion in U.S. exports creates some 6,000 jobs in this country. My legislation calls for the alignment of U.S. commercial interests and development priorities in Africa. Trade and aid are not mutually exclusive. Capacity building, for example, is a development tool, and it must be used to enable African countries to become more proficient in promoting trade and expanding wealth opportunities in their countries. Improving the competitiveness of U.S. businesses in Africa is in America's interest as well, since more prosperous Africans can afford U.S. manufactured goods. This legislation encourages a greater understanding among U.S. financial and business communities of the opportunities that Africa holds for U.S. exports. Today, U.S. publications only occasionally describe the commercial opportunities available in Africa. If you read Fortune, Business Week, or even Black Enterprise magazines, you will read perhaps an annual Africa-focused issue that is in general in its description of business in Africa, but there is little ongoing discussion of the kind of linkages that U.S. businesses are missing. Chinese, Japanese, and even Turkish business people are taking full advantage of those opportunities today, and American business people should have the same chances to benefit from them. The legislation fosters partnership opportunities between U.S. and African small and medium-sized enterprises, especially among the African diaspora businesses, which have not benefited from the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, as they might have. Again, this is a function of not having sufficient information on which to base important commercial decisions. The President is required, pursuant to the bill, if it becomes law, to designate a special Africa export strategy coordinator. U.S. trade policy is too often stovepiped, meaning that various agencies pursue their missions without sufficient coordination. It is increasingly competitive in an increasingly competitive global trade environment. This practice must end. The Secretary of Commerce is directed to ensure that at least 10 total U.S. and foreign commercial service officers are assigned to U.S. embassies in Africa for each of the first 5 fiscal years after enactment of the Act. We tried to increase foreign commercial service officers under AGOA, but their numbers are currently, in fact, shrinking. I see this legislation as complementing AGOA. It is absolutely not replacing it. When AGOA is reauthorized, and we hope that will be next year, this legislation will be a worthy companion to balance the benefits of U.S.-Africa trade for business people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. I'd like to now yield to Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by thanking you and Ranking Member Bass for your leadership and moving to markup H.R. 1777, Increasing American Jobs Through Greater Exports to Africa Act of 2013. You and Congressman Rush have shown incredible leadership in introducing a bill that is both good for our country and good for African nations. I also want to acknowledge the bipartisan Senate companion to S. 718 introduced by Senator Durbin, and that includes 10 other Senate members who have shown their support for this measure. We are now well familiar with the facts that African economies are growing at a respectable pace, and several consistently beyond that. Over the last dozen years, some of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. With over 1 billion Africans participating in the global marketplace, we see new consumers who are eager to take part in the flow of goods and services and who have increasing purchasing power for those goods and services. I'm pleased and strongly support this bill, which calls for a comprehensive United States strategy for public and private investment, trade, and development in Africa. Such a strategy is important and essential if the U.S. private sector is to engage effectively and support this type of engagement that African nations require if they are to transition from transitional aid models to that of trade and investment. I'd particularly note the important role played by the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service officers. These dedicated representatives of the Department of Commerce play an integral role in our efforts to expand U.S. investment in Africa. They're key to the local private sector and can introduce visiting U.S. companies to local government and private sector representatives. We need more of these experts in Africa, and I heartily support the bill's call for an increase in the number of foreign commercial service officers assigned to countries in Africa. If our nation seeks to be competitive on the continent, it will require new steps, new strategies, and new thinking to recognize that the U.S. can be a market leader and key business partner on the continent if we want to be. Indeed, for all of the discussion about the aggressive marketing tactics displayed by China and others, neither BRICS nations nor former colonial powers in Africa can match U.S. companies in terms of the marketing of quality of goods and services, the provision of sound maintenance contracts, and the development of outstanding executive training. This is why so many countries worldwide like to work with the U.S. private sector, and in this respect, Africa is no different. It's against this backdrop that I support this bill, which focuses on an assertive and comprehensive whole-of-government approach to USG and U.S. private sector engagement with the countries of Africa. Mr. Chairman, earlier this year, President Obama visited Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. During his visit to the continent, he spoke of his strong support for the reauthorization of AGOA and announced 2 landmark presidential initiatives, Power Africa, aimed at building the continent's access to electrical power to help grow businesses, and Trade Africa, aimed at developing greater interregional trade and augmenting U.S. trade and investment. This bill complements these initiatives by promoting greater USG synergy, facilitating public-private partnership, and augmenting U.S. bilateral relations with the countries of Africa. Mr. Chairman, in closing, I want to once again acknowledge the bipartisan, bicameral support under your leadership for not only the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, but the greater goal of growing partnership between the U.S. and African private sector. You and many of my colleagues in this committee have long recognized the importance of this goal for the United States and the countries of Africa. I thank you for your continued support and look forward to continuing to work with you and Ranking Member Bass and my colleagues in this regard. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Mr. Cicilline, thank you very much. Would any other members like to be heard?
Just would like to thank the Chairman for his foresight and his unrelenting pursuit to make sure that we have a good relationship with the continent of Africa, but also in terms of creating jobs here in America. And so I just, my compliments to him and wish him a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. Dr. Barr? Mr. Weber?
What he said.
Okay. Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for their support for this legislation, their co-sponsorship of it, and we will move to the full committee. The markup session of this subcommittee is adjourned, and then we now move to a hearing